Da 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 da. What's my good chair? Welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes, get those notifications out, let people know I've gone live. And in the meantime, if you've never met me before, I am Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside. And today I was all about the inside. In truth, I didn't step outside my apartment block in any way. I just stayed inside, did house projects, things that I've been letting slide here and there, taking in the lessons, filling my brain up with a lot of silly stuff. But how would I know if it was silly? At least if I didn't, put my toes into it, dip my fingers into it, give it a shot. Everybody has a right to be seen and to be heard. And, being online, I see lots of people who are just starting out. And I remember when I first started out, I've been here on YouTube for over 10 years now. And, it has been a lot of work. It has been a lot of change, not just in my personal life, because there was a lot of change in my personal life, but my mindset, in the way that I think, the way that I really look at myself now and really understand a lot of those things that I got wrong and a lot of those things that I possibly may have gotten right. And, we can't blame ourselves for what we don't know because, in truth, it's only not known until it's known. And if I wasn't even searching out answers or taking into consideration people who are different than me, who think different than me, that look different than me, that possibly have different a different mindset, right? Different political ideas, different religious ideas, different cultural ideas, different family traditions, and we can go into that conversation, and we have on occasion touched on some of that. And I was thinking, today, what could I bring up as something a little bit helpful? I share my experiences, I share my thoughts, but in some of those lessons that I picked up in my life, what one would I use to maybe share with people that they might find helpful? It would have to be relatable to some of those problems and some of those solutions in my own life. And then I thought of a great one, and I was doing the dishes. I went, oh, that's so great. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Somebody out there is going to be able to utilize this. And if it doesn't make some movement in where it's directed, in our self-worth, right? In the confidence and in the trust that we can give to ourselves to make good decisions and to be seen and to be heard. And for lots of us, that's really hard. When I was growing up, and let's get back to being in the kitchen washing dishes, I totally forgot that great idea. Why? Because I didn't write it down right away. And then before I came live, I says, "Oh yeah, I knew what I was going to talk about." And then blank, the light bulb just turned off, and I couldn't remember. And I says, "I know it was a good one. Come back to me." And as soon as I said that, it came back to me. But I think in setting up this little, I think it's a gift. It served me well. If it didn't serve who or what it was directed at in any way, at the very least, it made me feel like, you know, I was being seen and being heard. Okay, you guys know, right? It's kind of a tradition that every time I go live, this is the first time I heard the fire trucks tonight, but always when I start my lives, we're going to send them some good cheer. It sounds like they're going to be stopping in front of my building or the building across the street. Uh, let them knock on the door and then just find out that everything is okay, that it's a false alarm, and they could turn around and head out, get back to whatever they were doing. Tonight's a really nice evening for a long chair out in their parking lot. Sometimes when I go for my walks, I see them sitting out in their lawn chairs, enjoying the evening, right? To the best of their ability, knowing that their sense of peace and relaxation can be interrupted in a second, and then they're on the move. And those guys, they move pretty quick. Okay, so what I thought I would talk about a little bit today is being seen and being heard. Um, right? Somebody who grew up like me, you might think that you would want to be seen and want to be heard, because there was a lot of rejection, dejection, a lot of turning the heads, and a lot of not being taken into consideration. Also, in the fairness, right? Because I was always kind of treated like I was my own category, right? The rules set for one person were not the rules that I lived in. And yeah, I you would think that possibly, right? I would just kind of want to be seen, want to be heard, be trusted for what was going on in here, what was going on in here, and right in that persona of my physicality, that that these sayings that my grandmother and my dad used to say all the time. Oh, Cindy, it's what's in the inside that counts, not what's on the outside. As an adult, I come to understand very clearly that what's on the outside really does count. It really does. But because I didn't have any hope at that time, I didn't have any lifelines or any rescue, that I would just grab at any string, any little bit of advice that might make me feel a little bit better. And I would hold that close. And that one, where my grandparents and my dad would say, it's what's inside that counts, Cindy, not what's on the outside. Right? I was an obese kid. I thought I was an obese kid because that's the way I was made to feel my entire life. Eventually I did become what I thought I was, right? But when I go back now and I look at the photo albums and I look at myself, I go, geez, I really thought that I was massively obese, like my two uncles. And it was the fear, you know, this is what I attribute it to. It could have been other things too, knowing that it was a tool, right? And a tool for what? Well, I have ideas, right? And tools myself that help me better see what went wrong and what went right. But in talking a little bit about being seen and being heard, I wasn't somebody who wanted to be seen. I never wanted to be heard. And that's a truth, because I was so, in my mind, obese and ugly and good for nothing and useless and whatever other negative input could have been directed at me. I really took that to heart and I believed that. But I didn't want to be. I would much rather be off in a corner and studying everybody else, living vicariously through my sisters and their lives. And they always seem to have exciting, fun lives, right? And the few friends that I had. And, I come to be my own entertainment, my own best friend. I'd go off on adventures, or I would sit with people who wouldn't mind sitting with me and having conversations, even if it was just giving me insight. And, my aunt and my grandmother and my dad, they were like my best friends, right? Because nobody else would give me the time of day except in making me feel bad about myself, right? And, this is a very empathic trait. And again, when I say I look back at those albums and I could say, right, I wasn't even nearly as bad as I was made up to be physically, emotionally, mentally. I starred in moments, in truth. And yet I felt so unseen and unheard, but I didn't want to be seen. I may have wanted to be heard, but I didn't dare because, you know, whenever I opened my mouth, whenever I had anything to say, and I was a bit of a truth teller because, I could see in my own family that the rules didn't apply to me. Like, with others, my sister would tattle on me and I'd get spankings or right or punished or whatever it is. And then when I would do the same to them, it would always be Cindy, two wrongs don't make a right. Right. And then I wouldn't be seen and be heard in that way. Now the gift that I'm going to give is something in reflection of that, right? And it's something that served me well my entire life, uh, and if not for anybody else, but for my own sake, I recognize as a hypervigilant, empathic, right? I was so highly sensitive. I was so in tune to what everybody else was doing because of that directive in that unkindness, right? That always seemed to find me because I thought I attribute it because I was so obese. But in actuality, it was just me making myself my own target by being standoffish, by trying to be unvisible, by being invisible or sticking in a corner and just giving everybody the side eye and studying them and making people uncomfortable that way. I just always wanted to know how people ticked, why they ticked the way they did, why they thought and felt the way they did, why they picked the boyfriends that they did, why they behaved or misbehaved and get away with it, and yet I make one wrong move and right, and it was like chop 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 like this, right? So I always was looking for those answers that were related to my own life. Grateful, right? In the past 10 years or so, I have picked up lessons and I'm going to attribute all of that to this YouTube journey that I am in, right? It has led me into conversations and topics that have served me so well, and it has built up my confidence. And if nobody gets me, if nobody understands the topics that I talk about, right? That's okay because I'm doing this for myself and because YouTube is forever, right? In this moment, right? Maybe nobody gets what I was talking about. But somewheres down the road, after they've tried everything else, maybe some of these conversations that I have might hit home, might serve someone well. And that's the truth. But in being invisible, uh, it made it so that I wasn't so targeted, that I could do what I do without, right, too much retribution in that. And, it was in my own mindset. I came to realize this, it took a lot of lessons. It took a lot of years. It took a lot of looking deep into myself. But I was happy to do that because it was something I had never done before. I never realized because, I did make myself that targeted. I had the big L on my forehead for sure. And it was impossible for me to be invisible and not just say the L. How about the T for Target? Like, seriously, when I had that kind of mindset and that little bit of, I'd have to say it was woisy me. It was never in jealousy or resentment, because I could see, even though my story was different, my life was different, it was no more difficult than anybody else's out there. I'd see my girlfriends, go out with losers and idiots who would treat them bad and cheat on them. And I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, don't they understand, right? And sometimes, being the truth teller, right, I'd get myself in a situation and right, and I would lose friends in that, because nobody wanted to understand the truth. Nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. And sometimes I would learn and I would go back to being that person who would live vicariously either through other people, or I would go back to being invisible and just standing in a corner and living vicariously, right, through my friends and through my sisters' lives, and just take the little tidbits that every once in a while would come across the table, but still wanting to be invisible, right? To be heard, that was a different story, right? I always wanted to be heard. I always wanted people to understand how they hurt me, how they were wrong about me. I found myself becoming a people pleaser and always trying to prove myself and always trying to explain myself, right? Always explaining myself. But again, nobody wanted to see me or hear me. And I didn't get much chance in sticking up for myself. Now I'm big on sticking up for myself. And it started in high school, that process, only because by then I really did start getting a little bit bigger. Not as humongous as I felt or I thought I was, but I really, by that time, had in my mind and in my heart built up a persona that was dictated by others, and that's truth. And after a while, I picked up that baton, and I didn't need anybody else to tell me how stupid I was. I didn't need anybody else to tell me how ugly or fat I was, how useless I was, right? I didn't need that, because I was doing that myself. So grateful for the lessons, you guys. So grateful mindset, you guys. It just saved me beyond anything that I could explain. Like, I don't even know how anybody could even get an inkling of what it did for me in my life, because I was that person. I was that person. And in high school, and learning to become my own best friend, because I really didn't have much of a choice, right? Because if I didn't have myself to hang out with, who was I going to hang out with, right? Nobody. And so I did treat myself well. I did give myself those things that I thought I wanted, those things that I thought I needed. And I very not often said no to myself. And that's when that weight really did start coming on. And also in coping with what I was going through as a child and as a teenager. And you know, we all cope in our own ways. I call them handicaps. We all have handicaps. Sometimes they're physical, sometimes they're mental, sometimes they are emotional. And those emotional and mental ones, right? The emotional more than the mental ones, we can learn to hide those. And I hid that hurt pretty well. By high school, I had that persona, don't mess with me, right? But it was all talk in honesty. And every once in a while, somebody would call me on it, and I would get the poop beat out of me, and then I would be quiet for a little while, right? Until things settled down and I got triggered again, or somebody made me feel even lower than what I felt about myself. And believe me, I felt terrible for myself. And, I had a lot of compassion for what I was going through. And that was pretty beautiful, I think, because a lot of people don't have that compassion. They have pity for themselves, right? They feel sorry for themselves, but I never wanted to play that game, right? There are times when you get yourself in a mess that you did have to, but I always felt so terrible. I felt like such a phony, such a liar because I didn't truly feel that way for myself, but I knew sometimes that you don't get what you want, you don't get what you need unless somebody truly feels sorry for you, right? There were a few times that I felt that genuineness when somebody was feeling bad for me, not sorry for me, but bad for me. And I would move in that direction because I could feel that it was genuine. It wasn't, ha ha ha, it wasn't that. It was kind of like, and it wasn't like, aw, right? It was more like, oh, she just needs a little bit of help, right? And I would warm up to that. And in those moments, I would pick up the most amazing lessons. Hello, Eugene. I see you there. Hello, Earl. Hi, dear. I have our wedding all arranged. You do, Earl, eh? Thank you so much. That's very sweet of you. Very sweet of you to say. I'm not sure if I'm going to be ever going down that route again. I'm just saying I don't know, right? In this moment, I am a strange bird, right? And it would take somebody very unique and somebody very full of amazing mindset to even get what I'm all about. Positivity, it's always been there. And that was a gift from my father. It was a gift in the lessons and the conversation and in the times that he spent with me. Don't distract me in the topic. It's a good one, you guys, right? So I lost track in there. Thank you, Earl. I'm gonna blame that one on you. But my father was also my best friend, and you know, he boosted me up. He kept me positive all the time, and again, in those quotes that he loved so much, and he'd throw them at me, and it made me feel good till I ended up and back in school, or my dad would go away to work and I would be left at home to my own demise. That it taught me lessons, and I learned to become my own best friend in those times that I didn't have people in my life that truly cared for me. So I thought, in the lessons of being heard, right? And it's not necessarily being seen because I never wanted to be, right? You could just see me all going red when Earl talks like that, right? Right? Like these things, they kind of make me uncomfortable, maybe because I've never had these kind of conversations, this kind of attention this way, right? Later on in my life, yes, but my naivety, it's a hard word for me, right? It did make me tight. It did make me prudish. And that was in lessons in my mother's own fears, in her experiences in her life, that she passed those down, those fears and those insecurities and those naiveties. and those prudish ideas down to her kids. Sometimes she put them down to her kids to control them, right? My sister was a wild child. She was very beautiful and very well endowed by the time she was 12 years old. And so they had to have a little bit more of a handle on her. She used to sneak out the window to meet her boyfriends and stuff. And I would cover her butt. But my dad actually chased the guys down the street with a shotgun. He did that. I remember he did that. He would never shot the kids or anything, but he had to scare them. He had to do something, and you'd never get away with that these days, right? But in the 70s, yeah, my dad, I remember that night when he chased those kids down the sidewalk, and I tell you, they never came around the house again, and they were always super polite when they met my dad on his evening walks and stuff, right? So yeah, so getting back to this topic of what I could give as a little gift to somebody, because you might be in the same situation as me where you don't want to be seen, but you have something to say, even if it's just because you're your own best friend or your own bodyguard, and you just, right, you're constantly triggered, and you're constantly made to feel bad, but in your mind and in your soul, you're a good person. You didn't do wrong, right? And because you can't express yourself, you have a hard time explaining yourself, right? Without being interrupted, shut down. Somebody just totally rejects you and turn their back on you, right? Or gives you a smack upside the head. And 60s and 70s again. My experience would not have happened in a moment if I had grown up in this day and age. But in the 60s and 70s, it was so different. People grumble and complain and think that the world's going to pot, that the kids are growing up. The kids are just growing up with only one point of view, right? With one perspective, that one parent, because it's a rarity that the two parents stay together for the whole marriage. I'm optimistic that we're going to go back to some of these old traditions. I think we need to, um, because otherwise there's no survival for Homo sapiens, for human beings, right? We will go extinct just like the thousands and thousands of animals that have gone extinct before us, right? Even in human beings, there were at least 20, at least, right? They're still finding, they just found another one. I can't remember where they found Australia. Yeah, maybe Australia. They found some more remains. But we have not even come close to discovering how many different human beings they were, and they were all eliminated. They all went extinct except for Homo sapiens. We're in a stage now where we're evolving again, right? Conscious man, right? And this is the truth. We're always evolving, always evolving. But this one gift is something I always did. I was a bit of a writer. I always was. It was never recognized. Oh, it was recognized in elementary school. We were all asked to write a little story, and I wrote a story, and it ended up going into the school system to all the teachers and principals and all the different schools. I grew up in Vancouver. Um, right? They thought I was going to be some kind of protege or something when it came to writing, but my parents shut that down. It was never nurtured. It was never harnessed in any way. And it was the same with anything that I did well. It was either shot down or ignored. But I did enjoy writing, and for the very least, I continued to write for myself. I didn't write for anybody else because, right, again, I didn't want to be seen and I didn't want to be heard. But I remember I was really proud. I think it was only in maybe the second grade. I didn't go to school. I think I was just about to turn 7 years old when I started going to school. I didn't go to kindergarten, and I actually failed uh, grade two because I was an avid reader by the time I was 3 years old. Taught myself how to read through comic books. My dad would bring home comic books and always would read my aunt's comic books because she would read Archie books. And, I always wanted to know what Veronica and Archie and, oh, the blonde one. Can't remember. It's been a long time since I read an Archie magazine. But the white bubbles in the conversations, I always wanted to know what the white bubbles said. And I taught myself to read by looking at the comic squares and looking at the situation of the comic squares and then relating it to what had to have been in the bubble. And slowly I got to read the patternings in that. And I actually taught myself to read. I think I was 3 years old and I was reading. I was only reading comic books, but I was reading. Went into school, and in the second grade, right, because I was already advanced in my reading, or maybe being that child, right? I didn't excel because I didn't want to participate in class because I was so naive and so shy and so hyper vigilant and so oh, empathic. Even then, I was always thinking somebody was out for me. That they put me in a program to read differently, and I don't know what the program was, but the letters of the alphabet sounded like the letter, right? So it would have been abba, st, right? And this is the alphabet that I learned, and it confused me so badly because I even had to write the way that the word sounded. And lots of times the F is PH, and right, and then there's GH, and there's lots of silent words, and lots of times the letters sound like O and not O, right? And but it mixed me up so bad that I actually failed grade two. And what shame in that, right? And as a child being held back a grade in school after I even started school so late, I might have been even close to 8 years old because you had to start school at 7, but my birthday wasn't till October. School started in September. So I think possibly I didn't start school until I was almost 8 years old. I don't know what the reasoning is in that, but I suspect it had something to do with my dad being a nomad and that we were always being picked up, and my dad was always moving somewheres else. Um, but I failed grade two. But I quickly caught up after that, sometimes in that shame and that guilt and whatever is being projected at you. You have to, right? I'll show you, right? And you overwork and you overstimulate yourself, and right, and that people pleasing, you catch up, and I did. And, I became a bit of a storyteller in my voice and in my writing, and I carried that on my entire life. Now, because I didn't want to be seen, right? And then later on, nobody wanted to see me. Nobody wanted to hear me. I become like the truth teller, right? Don't tell your dad you're going to give him a heart attack. This is what my mother would say to me all the time. Don't say anything to your dad. You're going to give him a. And so that guilt and shame is, oh my goodness, if my dad passes away, it's going to be all my fault, right? My dad was diagnosed with congenital heart disease even before he hit his adulthood, and he didn't think he was going to have much time to live. He didn't even think he was going to have the opportunity to get married and have children. He thought he was going to be long gone by then, but he did. And he ended up doubling his life. And I attribute that too to mindset, because my dad was deep into the mindset himself. I never in my entire life ever heard him yell at anybody except for my mother when they get into those airy, scary fights, right? And they were scary and volatile. And that was the only time I ever saw my dad angry. That was the only time I ever heard my dad say anything unkind to anybody. My dad was just so sweet, so loving. Everybody loved him so much. And, he brought his kids up on those amazing quotes. And thank goodness that he did, because it's how I found mindset, because I recognized my father in it, right? That stoicism and the mindset and the quotes and some of that thought leadership that he so appreciated, that he had these bookshelves full of books and stuff, that I recognized those leaders, and it just woke me up. I don't know why. Possibly, right? We all wake up when we wake up. Maybe my father had those conversations. Maybe my father passed on those lessons for me. But I think for the most part, I learned from him being the example from me, right? For me. And yeah, grateful, so grateful that I paid attention. And that only happened too because of my hypervigilance. But growing up, writing served me in being able to say my piece, because I never got a chance to say my piece. When people would wrong me, and this is the gift, you guys, I would write, right? I would put all my feelings into a letter. And I never, right, if I was going to do a letter, it wasn't going to be one page or a paragraph. It was going to be pages. And I would get everything off my chest. Now, remember, lots of times, like when you go to work and so ticks you off, and then somebody steals your lunch, and then you spill coffee over your work, and then, your boss calls you into the office, and then you walk by somebody's desk and somebody goes, "Hey, idiot." And then, right? And just that person gets it for absolutely everything that went wrong with their day. And that's kind of an unfairness, right? But, right, it's kind of that idea of somebody getting on your last nerve, and they get it for what everybody and everything else that went bad in your day. So I was that person, right? Because I was trained to hold everything inside, like I couldn't say anything. And if I did say anything, it would just be shut down in the moment, whether it was teachers or my mother or my sisters or the kids at school, right? And it was pretty hard to suck that up, to right, to choke on that, because literally that's what I was doing. I was choking on that. And so I found a way to express myself. And I would write letters to these people, right? I would write letters to the teacher that I thought treated me badly. I would write letters to my mother and my father, and I would write letters, and they would be like 4 pages long, and I would just spill my guts and spill my heart and let people know, this is unkind. Why do you do this? Why do the rules don't set here, and there's a different set of rules for me, right? If I had said what I said in those letters, I would have been shut down after the first sentence, and I wouldn't have been able to get anything out. On occasion, and after a while, my mother getting these letters, she would just take them after I hand them to her, and she would just rip them up. But I learned just to put them in her favorite places. She'd find them under her chair, under her pillow, right? Taped to the the mirror in the bathroom. I would put them absolutely anywheres because I knew that if I wasn't around and she found those letters, her curiosity, just her curiosity, would get the best of her and she would read the letters. She would always read the letters. So even if it didn't do me any good, and lots of times it didn't, lots of times she comes storming out, waving that paper at me, smacking me in the head with the paper, and the next thing you know, I'm flying into the wall or I'm on the ground or my mother's got a big chunk of my hair in her hand. Like, right, dynamic families. And I see I'm laughing about it now because I understand that had nothing to do with me. Yes, I triggered her, but that's what I did. And I was just a child. I didn't know any better. It wasn't my intent to make her angry, but I knew it probably would because I knew my hypervigilance, the person that my mother was, that I knew how volatile she was, right? And I knew if I was going to let her know, right, how I didn't appreciate what she did to me or try and point out to some of those faults that she had so that maybe she might change her ways. That was only always my hope that she would change her ways, right? And there were never any, I'm going to tell dad, because I would never have told my dad anything because, right, I was so afraid that my dad would have a heart attack and right and I would be at fault with that. I didn't have anybody. I couldn't even go to school counselors or teachers because the moment she found out she'd get called into school or something, then she'd be just like waiting for me. And right, it was always more painful. But there were times that I couldn't take it. And again, I would spill my heart, I'd spill my mind. I'd write it down. And her curiosity, I knew her curiosity as to what was going on inside my brain and in my heart, that she couldn't help herself. And if I wasn't around, because if I was around, she'd just tear it up and throw it at me just to let me know that she didn't have any use for anything I had to say. But, right, in all honesty, if I wasn't around, I knew she was gobbling it all up because her curiosity, right? And so the gift is, right? If you've really got something to say, if you need to say something, right? If always you're being rejected or you're being shut down in your thoughts, and in your feelings, that you really don't feel like anybody's taking you into account in any way. We're human beings. We are very, very curious. And if you were to do that, right? To write your feelings down, write them in a letter, right? Put it in a mailbox even. Curiosity will get to whoever you want to make that point to. And that's a truth. And even if, like I said, it didn't work out for me, that I'd be getting it after doing that, for my own self-worth, it was worth it. 100%. And in my ideas and thoughts, anyways, I was going to get it anyway, right? It didn't matter. Just looking at her the wrong way or coming home 5 minutes before dinner or asking for second helpings, or it didn't matter. There would be excuses for any. She didn't even need a reason. She could just make something up. I knew I was going to get it anyway. So if I was going to get it, I wanted it to be on my own terms, that I really wanted her to know that I knew exactly what she was doing, right? And I wanted her to know how unkind it was. But I also wanted to give her, the idea and the knowledge that forgiveness is an amazing thing. All you have to do is say sorry. And neither of my parents ever said sorry. And I never, ever, not once in my entire life. And my mother lived to be 72 years old. My dad, 47, but my mother lived to be 72 years old. She never once apologized, not to any of us, not not once. And some people are like that, right? But it didn't stop me from trying to get that little bit of understanding, a little bit of kindness, right? I thought, right, get through to her in some way, and it never stopped me from trying. But at the very least, I felt good that I stuck up for myself in some way, right? And like I said, humans are very, very curious. If you have something to say, if you need a course correction, or you at least need somebody to know and see and understand what they did to you, oh, yeah, they'll know, see, and understand for sure. Sometimes they'll care, sometimes they don't care, sometimes they will never care. And that's the truth. But they got to know that you know, right? You have to do that for yourself. I had to do that for myself. It was some wonderful self worth for myself. It gave me some bravery, number one, uh, but confidence to understand that, you know, I was a good person, right? That I could find my own way to express the wrongs and make them right, even if it did make a difference, right? That for myself, it did make a difference. So if you've got something to say and you know you're going to get shut down, you know you're not going to be able to be seen or heard without somebody jumping in and giving you a piece of their mind. This is a narcissistic trait too. I didn't even know what a narcissist was until I was in my 50s, right? So I didn't have any chance in hell of getting to have a say because I was always shut down in that. But those letters, they served me well, and that's the truth. Into my adulthood, right? Even to this day, I'm still my own best friend. I am my own bodyguard, my own defender, right? And my own cheerleader, right? Because lots of times I had to talk myself into getting that letter slipped in somewheres because I knew what was coming when it did. But I also knew that curiosity killed the cat. And that she would know exactly how I felt, right? And she would know that I would know that what she did was wrong. And I'm not just putting that directive at my experience, my relationship with my mother, but I would do that with teachers. I would do that with the school kids. I don't know. Oh, I've done it with my sisters as an adult. I've done it with my sisters. Oh yeah, I did that with my husband when my marriage fell apart. Oh my goodness, I became a letter writer from hell on that one. And again, right? My husband read every single one, every single one. Why? Because curiosity got to him. He wanted to know what was going on in here and what was going on in here, right? But if I had said anything, oh my goodness, it would have been shut down right away. 100%. I hope that serves somebody out there. Practice your handwriting, right? So, because people will stop reading if they see all the spelling mistakes and they can't read your chicken scratch. So do your very best to stay within the lines and enough spaces in between the words that makes it at the very least easy enough for them to read it, right? And they'll get it. They'll understand. They'll know, right? They won't admit. but you'll feel good about yourself. You'll feel glad in the end that you did that because, right, that's treating yourself like you matter. And everybody needs to feel that way, right? Everybody does. I believe I only got through what I got through by the grace that I had, the person that I had as my father, right? And that served me well, even if I didn't have those conversations with him, right? Maybe if he didn't pass those lessons down to me intentionally, that in his own experience, he became the evidence for myself, right? And then also, I recognized it in that time that I needed so much to believe in something, right? And I recognized the mindset, and that became my lifeline, right? So it's in us paying attention 100%. It's in us paying attention. Okay, let's see what Eugene has to say. I'm doing great tonight, Eugene. Thank you so much. And thank you so much. It's not a top, it's a it's a blouse. Yeah, I usually wear the dresses when it's really, really hot. And then past couple of days, it's been cool. It's been very comfortable, but very smoky. If you don't know, I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and we're dealing with wildfires right now. And the whole city is like smog, like fog, even like really, really thick. Even now, I can see the smog, and it's pitch black outside. But when you see that whiteness floating around, right? That's all forest fire. That's all fires going on, and it's going to take a while for them to dissipate. The weather's cooling down a little bit, so I suspect the fires, if we get some good rain, it'll kick up that smoke a little bit. But, once it calms down, right, the wind will pick that up and just blow it away, and we'll be back to, right, clear skies. Okay, you guys, that's got to be my good cheer for tonight. Um, yeah, I thought a little gift in that. I'm so grateful, grateful, grateful that it came back to me. And I'll know better when I get these ideas of little things that I can give out there that might help somebody, right? It's just like, writing a letter to the president and, right, giving him a piece of your mind, or to customer service in that store or that restaurant, talking to the manager, right? Going up and complain is just going to make you look like a negative. They'll shut you down, and then when you leave, they'll just go, oh, right. You write it in a letter, that curiosity is going to get to them, right? And they'll read every single word. They might have something to say afterwards, they might not, but at least you can feel good about yourself, right? That you treated yourself like you mattered, that you got to have your say one way or another. Okay, you guys, that's my good cheer. You have a great night. See you tomorrow.